3 p.m. We have with us task force members, Bill Cummings, Paul Manganero, Stephanie Zaremba, Sumya Ganapathy, and Patrick Fortin. We also have with us Lynn Sweet from LDS Consulting, Mina Makarios from Anderson Krieger, Town Manager Beth Rudolph, and myself, Brian Zakelli. The goal for today is to go through the draft report and talk about the contents of that report and also vote on specific motions that staff has gleaned from your reports. I think it made sense. I think it makes sense for us to start off super quick with legal counsel. So Mina, I'll throw you right here on the spot, is that there were a number of questions that kind of have gone back and forth about potentially if we do reissue the RFP, under what circumstances can we do that? And under what circumstances could we not issue the RFP in terms of where we are in terms of liable? Are we liable for anything related to the RFP? So Mina, why don't you start us off there, and then we'll go on to the votes and the actual document that was circulated. So Mina, take it away.
Thanks, Brian. The question of whether you can issue a new RFP, or whether the board rather can issue a new RFP, is based on how different the new RFP is from what was proposed before and what Civico and others responded to. You can't issue a new RFP simply to see if there's anybody else out there with the same substantively the same requirements. However, if the requirements are differing substantially, either because of new factors being added or factors are being switched around in a significant way, that would probably require issuance of a new RFP rather than continuing to go down the same route. So I believe, I know it was after I left the call, but I've had a chance to speak to different staff to understand the conversation last time. The issue when we talked about it very early on was whether simply issuing a new RFP and starting over was appropriate, or asking existing bidders on the last RFP was appropriate. And in my view, for more information, my view, that wouldn't be, because you'd still be operating under the same RFP, but sort of continuing a competition that effectively closed with the first and second place winner. However, issuing a new RFP with new factors or substantially different weighting of factors would be the appropriate course if that's where the board wants to go.
Okay, so super quick recap. There'd have to be a significant change from the original RFP that would allow us to issue a new one. A little further on the liability that the town has for going forward with this RFP, there was a number of questions related to that. So if we quote back out of this, like, where does that leave us? That has come up from a number of different people. Mina?
Yeah, so in terms of liability to Civico, there is no liability to Civico until a deal is fully consummated, which includes a town meeting vote. That was in their in the RFP and the land development agreement that they signed. And so their willingness to continue discussion is with that awareness that they take the risk that it might not, they may not get to a deal. So no liability to Civico, and in my view, no liability if you stay with the existing RFP, no liability to anyone else. Penrose is the second bidder. They have not alleged any inconsistency with the RFP. We talked about the one letter we received, or the letter we received regarding that, and I gave you my view of that a couple of weeks ago.
Thanks, What Mina. About the fact that Civico has invested some probably $50,000 to get to sort of this point? Wouldn't it be in the best interest to try and negotiate some of the finer points before, because it's time and money to the town to go back out and bid too?
Lynn, I wouldn't disagree with that it's time and money and that it's cumbersome to get an RFP. I'm staying sort of within the four corners of legal liability. I don't think you'd have legal liability to Civico, whether there's reputational harm, as in not in the legal sense. This is a small R, small h, but sort of whether that discourages other bidders, whether Civico is disappointed or, refuses to bid again, whatever. All of those are sort of strategic considerations for sure that the board will have to keep in mind. But from a legal perspective, the case law is pretty strong that lost bid preparation costs, unless the RFP was unfairly evaluated, are not owed by a town or a public entity.
And so we're going to go with Stephanie and then Sumya. This is specifically questions for legal about the ramifications of issuing a new RFP. Stephanie?
Yeah, so 2 follow-ups to that, Mina, thank you for explaining. Perhaps I took an incorrect note. I wrote in notes from a much earlier session when we were talking about ground lease length. You talked about how changing the ground lease length likely would require a new RFP, and you had made a comment that that could potentially open the town up to liability to Civico. And perhaps I completely misunderstood.
Stephanie, it's hard for me to recount exactly when in that conversation, but so we may have been talking past each other a little bit, but changing the ground lease length could only be done with a new RFP. Perhaps what I was talking about, because I do remember there was a conversation very early on, why can't we negotiate with several people at the same time, which as a private entity, you would and you would want to. You'd sort of want to have multiple doors open. Unfortunately, the public procurement route doesn't provide for that. And that's what I was suggesting, that we couldn't go back, for instance, and simply ask Penrose or ask Wynn, could you, would you do a 50-year lease and then we'll switch horses? We couldn't do that.
Got it. Thank you. And second question, if the town wanted to make some of these substantial changes, but let's say we decided to no longer require parking. We're just taking parking. I'm not proposing that, I'm just giving an example. Could we continue in our negotiations just with Civico with substantial changes, or would removing like a heavily weighted factor, would that potentially open us up to liability for kind of totally changing course, post RFP process?
I want to be careful with the word liability, so I don't want to be, well, I will be fussy as your lawyer. I guess that's my job, but it opens you up to a risk. I don't know if it opens up to liability in the sense.
Sorry,
yeah,
that's what I meant. Does it open us up to a potential claim?
Right, and that's I understood. That's how I understood your question. So that's how I was going to interpret it. Whether I don't think there's financial risk, as in the town pays money, but I do think if you were to go back, anytime you have an RFP and there's a significant factor that changes, either because you went back and asked other folks or because you asked the entity that was sort of selected to negotiate with to change something substantial, there is a risk. It's hard to quantify, a year and a half plus out, how big, that one of the other bidders or someone who didn't bid at all could say, had I known there was no parking required, I would have changed my proposal in X way. What I will also just emphasize here, we're not in your kind of typical RFP process in the sense, or bid process in the sense, when you have a construction project, if you're asking, build us a new high school, even a complicated construction project, build us a new high school. If you drop a wing of the high school, and that was, going to save 3 months of time and an entire subcontract or something, a bidder much more easily can say, well, if I knew this was a project I could fit into my schedule, or I would need fewer laborers, et cetera, I might have bid on it, or I might have bid differently. It's a lot harder to do that and to do the sort of counterfactual with land use RFPs like this, because by design, the state leaves a lot of flexibility in the evaluation criteria. And it is part of what I think this group has been struggling with, and sort of was tasked to do, is figure out how to weigh competing topics that don't necessarily, while sort of there's an evaluation criteria, their reasonable minds could differ which ones to sort of, which basket each bidder should sort of put their eggs in, I guess. So that's a challenge.
Thanks for that clarification, Sumya, and then Lynn.
Thank you for the clarification, Mina. I did have a question in terms of just the weighted factors, in terms of what we consider important in the RFP. Is that based on the original RFP, what's considered 3X, 2X, and 1X from that document? And how different does it have to be in terms of what's considered within the normal parameters versus different?
Well, I would say this. I don't know that there is a fine line, first of all, but to the extent that you're thinking about it, those are factors for selecting among the proposers who did propose, right? So that doesn't mean that in a negotiation, if I don't remember the exact numbers, but design, let's say everybody seems, all around generally content with the design. Even if that had a high factor, that doesn't mean that if adding parking, which has become a concern once a negotiation started, but was always a factor, adding a few parking spots, for instance, or adding better affordability, which was always a factor, at the expense of something that might not really change the design, but doesn't, much, you could probably do that. So it's hard to sort of take the weighting, which was used for selection, and carry it really through to negotiation, because the pressure points in the negotiation might be different. What might have been easy for, I'll use a made up example. This isn't necessarily Civico. It might be that one bidder has no problem for themselves financially satisfying the affordability component. They feel very strongly they can do it. And so when it comes to that weighting, they do just fine. But just to kind of eke by on the parking component cost them, for whatever reason, a whole lot of money or requires a lot more work from them. When you start negotiating the lease, that pressure point gets exposed, or start negotiating the LDA in the lease, that pressure point for them becomes exposed in a way that really doesn't tie to the weighting the town put on, do we pick bidder A or bidder B between the two. So, but to go back to a new RFP, I think, there would be some who would argue even a 1X change matters because it could change things. And some who might say, well, that's, putting a feather on one side of the scale, not an elephant. And so which one, how far that goes is not something courts have really given a clear answer to, that I could tell you it's X, if you change it twice, it's too much.
Sounds complicated.
Yes.
Sorry. Lynn, and then I think we're going to try to get to the memo.
Yeah, I think I was going to add just a couple of notes and pose one more question, because I think Mina answered my questions, which is, well, what if you do a little bit of tweaking to the affordability, and what if you maybe reduce the retail component and therefore, get a few more parking spaces? It sounds like on its face that doesn't rise to a new RFP. I don't know whether or not, trying to take down the Chamber of Commerce building is another item. And I'm kind of hung up on that because there's so many unknowns around that. But I will say that from a practical standpoint, from other municipalities that have issued RFPs, awarded a bidder, and then kind of gone back and stopped the RFP process and started again, they do tend to lose credibility in the development field when they do that. And so just from kind of like a psychological standpoint, again, that you've had this one developer that spent an enormous amount of time and money, kind of getting to this point. I just want you to kind of keep that in mind. You may not actually have anybody come back to the table, you may, but it's just a very small world out there in the affordable housing world, at least, when it comes to these RFPs, and people need to sort of, development companies need to make a decision about what's the best amount of time and resources that they're going to put into something. And I'm sure that doesn't come across the way I want it to. I just want it to be informational. Thank you.
Thanks, Lynn. I'm Okay, so I'm going to put up on the screen the document that was sent to everybody. There are only 2 edits. One edit is a suggested edit by Paul that came in to me this morning. And one, and then there are 2 potential motions to be added that were sent by Stephanie. Pat, you have a hand. You're muted.
I do have a couple edits that I didn't send or proposed edits, but additionally, I thought we had Paul's motion on the floor from last time. That once we heard from Mina, we were going to deal with Paul's motion and get that over with. So is that your first plan?
So why don't I put it up, and I'll show you where we're at. So this cover letter, what the hope is that we would go over this. If anyone had any issues with this, the kind of informational portion of the cover letter, Pat, what you're talking about is right here, is our first motion that we would be voting on, which is down here. So we're almost there. I just want to make sure that everybody is okay with this cover letter. This cover letter is, you've seen this. It was sent to you just 2 days ago, though. No changes have been made to this cover letter at the moment. So does anyone have any questions or comments, or you can give edits now or Pat, why don't you go ahead, and then Sumya.
Yeah, mine are more related to motions than the cover letter, so I'll stay out of this for now.
Sure. Yeah, no, the hope is that we're going to go, the bulk of this will be voting on motions to get those in, and the rest of this is a little more mechanical. Sumya.
So Brian, I just had a quick question. When we had to weight all these items, some of the items I weighted as high. I didn't find any flaws with it, or I felt it was okay. Would that be fine, and just our report will be given to the select board?
Sorry, you mean that you've made changes from your original report, or?
No, I didn't make. So for example, revenue to the town, I weighted as 4, but personally, I think the amount of revenue we're getting is satisfactory for all the other aspects of this project. So I wouldn't change the revenue to the town. So I wasn't sure if that's
Gotcha.
just part of the report or.
Sure. So I think what I'm getting is that so these are just rankings in terms of what you think are priorities, not necessarily that you think something was wrong with the current Civico proposal or right with the Civico proposal. This is not really related to that in terms of specifically the Civico proposal. This is information to the select board to say, when you negotiate, you should kind of do it in this ranking order of, so if that makes any sense. But no, it doesn't. It's not really talking specifically about Civico. It's talking about how to negotiate. What are the levers to pull first, and how hard should you pull them?
But I do think, to your question, that it's relevant if you want to say in your report, your individual report, that although you ranked revenue, high, you felt like the Civico proposal provided adequate revenue to the town as compared to all the other, things that were offered in the proposal.
And the other thing I think it's important to it as well is, especially with the IPCC climate report, I think something related to climate change should be one of the factors that the select board looks at as well, even if it's not one of the 6 criteria listed.
So I think that could be put into 2 things. One could be put into your report, just your specific report, and it could also today be brought up as a motion, so that everyone could potentially vote on that. So these are the cumulative.
Brian, that could be included in as a piece of the design too, that you're designing a building that is mitigates climate change.
Definitely, the sustainability portion is part of that design criteria. So very quickly, the cumulative scores here show that availability of public parking and the affordable market rate mix were the 2 highest at 25 and 23. a small jump goes down to revenue at 17. And then the last three at 14, 13, and 13 are design, ground lease, and town oversight. We just simply took your rankings and put them in and added the scores up. If anyone doesn't have any questions up until this green is one edit from Paul. But before that, this is all, does anyone have any questions, comments, or concerns up until this point in the draft? And the only thing that the rest of the draft here are these motions, which we will spend most of the rest of the hour on. And I'm not in this green yet. So I'm talking about everything up here, just kind of saying the mechanics of when we met, what we reviewed, and what the weight of these scores are. So any questions or comments about this? Okay, great. We now have an edit from Paul in green here. So what this is talking about here is that the task force was able to come to a consensus on the overall findings and recommendations, and voted at our meeting on October 8th to submit 5 individual reports from all the task members. Each of these reports is attached along with the various materials reviewed by the task force. So there's going to be a number of materials. We had put that it was going to be town staff memos and LDS consulting group memos. The edit that Paul had put forward was to say that the LDS consulting group was hired and its scope of work was established by the former town manager before the task force was formed. LDS's work was not under the direction or control of the task force. So we can talk about this edit now, and if any other staff members would want to say anything related to this, I guess now would be the time. But Paul, why don't you kind of talk about your thoughts here, saying
Sure.
that LDS was not necessarily under the control of the task force. So I'll minimize this and we can have a little discussion.
Sure, thank you. I think right from our very first meeting, we had discussed this and, how important the transparency and getting this right this time was. And I expressed at that time, nothing against Lynn and her firm, but I thought it would have been wiser to wait until the task force was formed, get our input and have us formulate a little direction. We were told by the former town manager, and I'm paraphrasing at that time, that she went ahead and did it for time's sake. And, she knew it would take another week or two for the task force to be formed, and then we'd have to review applicants and stuff. So I just wanted to be known out there that how we got to this point with the consulting. And I think Lynn's done a great job. But I myself personally would have had some other questions that I wanted to get answered from a financial point of view that weren't addressed. So I just think that should be on the record so people know. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Does anyone else have anything further about this?
Yeah, so obviously I was not the town manager, or acting town manager at the time, so I can't speak to previous discussions, but I do think, certainly through this task force meeting process, you guys have requested initial information and analysis by Lynn. So it's fair, I think, to add that. We're going to add a comment in here about the task force, working with Lynn throughout the process.
Excuse me, Beth, you said you think it was fair to add that or not?
Yeah, so I mean, I think I can't, Brian, I don't have the language in front of me, but I think we could add, if you're willing, add something to the effect that work was not under the direction or control of the task force. However, task force worked. There you go, Brian. You keep typing. You tell me.
I was just going to type what you said, which was requested additional information and analysis.
Yeah, throughout the task force meetings or something like that, if that's reasonable.
Yeah, but some of that, in my view, some of that information was not provided, such as the all market value of the property and the 99-year financial analysis. So I don't want to make it sound like additional information was asked for and given.
I mean, we can't deny the fact that we have pages of memos from LDS Consulting answering questions. So I can understand what you're talking about, the scope. We can focus on the scope, but there's no doubt that the group, the task force asked questions. LDS did memos and analysis and gave you answers. Maybe it wasn't all of the answers, but there needs to be some acknowledgement that she provided answers.
So maybe we can put it this way. However, the task force requested additional information analysis, of which some of that information analysis was complete. And they can reference, like,
well, if you want to maybe call out the specific things that you just mentioned, that I can't recall the specific things you said, like the 99-year lease evaluation, or
we can just say the things were not. Yeah, we can say the few things that were not there. So a 99-year lease evaluation, and then what was the other thing you said?
Market rate, right?
The all market rate value of the property.
Can I jump in though? Because since this is the cover letter that we're all supposed to be in agreement on, I'm growing increasingly uncomfortable with this edit. You know, I think just there's a lot of factual material, especially where we're above, where it talks about like the dates on which we met. The select board authorized hiring a consultant. I don't remember off the top of my head to what extent they were involved in evaluating and hiring LDS. Paul, I'm just starting to think that like maybe this is something that you would feel better putting in your own report, because this is getting a little bit editorial.
I respect that, but I think it's appropriate right here where it is under findings and recommendations.
Well, as this is supposed to be a cover letter we all agree on, you know, if we're going to say a 99-year lease evaluation and an all market rate value analysis were not provided, I would want to say they were not provided because that was completely outside the scope of what the task force was asked to look at or what Lynn was hired to do. So I think we're going to keep editing each other's edits, and I'm just saying I'm a little uncomfortable with the direction it's going right now.
That's why I thought my original edit was more precise and it was very to the point, and just informing people, not nitpicking every little thing, but just wanting people to know that this task force didn't have anything to do in the selection of the consulting group, nor did we design the scope of the work.
What if we just keep the first sentence? LDS Consulting Group was hired and its scope of work was established by the former town manager before the task force was formed. Does everybody agree to that statement?
Yeah, that's what I propose, yes.
Could it be possible? I mean, I don't know if this needs to be in the cover letter though, because the select board contracted with LDS before we started, and it just might be better in our report. Just reading
well, this is part of our report, and it's right there under findings and recommendations. And I think for transparency and especially to the general public, I think it's very, very important.
Sumya, is your hand still up, or is that from previously?
Yeah, sorry, I'm just reading it. I apologize.
Sure. Pat, and then Lynn, and then we'll go from there.
I get where everyone's going, but this is, I guess this cover letter is intended to be findings that we can all agree on. There's no question that the town hired Lynn, and I've said it before, I think Lynn is very good at what she does, but the scope is the issue. And I think if we were picking that, there would have been different discussions on the scope. So I don't think what Paul has written is really, it's not taking shots at Lynn. It's not doing anything. It's just stating a fact that we weren't involved, just so that people know we didn't hire the consultant. And I mean, if you want to say the scope of the work, it kind of covers what's the facts. I don't think these are hard facts to disagree with.
I don't disagree, Pat. What's written now, the simple one sentence, I'm fine with.
I think everyone can agree that this is the truth.
Yeah,
Lynn, please.
Obviously a very uncomfortable discussion for me to sit through. I'm concerned about the reputation of my company of putting a sentence in like this, because implies that our company didn't do the work that it was hired to do. And I'm just going to put that out there. So do what you want. I was hired by the town. I was interviewed by the Board of Selectmen. I was interviewed by the town manager. I was given a scope of work to do. I've answered all the questions that I practically can't answer at this point in time.
Is this in a place for this sentence to move forward, or potentially have? I do kind of agree with everybody here, is that as soon as one sentence gets in, there's a possible edit, and then another possible edit, and another possible edit. So this is why staff tried to take a crack at it, to put something in front of you. I don't know if we have to basically then go to a vote for this edit, which doesn't really help any. I mean, that doesn't really help anyone, because the idea is that it's supposed to be at least something we agree on. The motions, who knows, right? We cannot. I think we know we're not going to be on the agree on recommendations. If there are people that don't agree with this, or it's a 3-2 vote, then that's essentially not what we came to the agreement that we were going to all come to an agreement for this cover letter. So, Stephanie?
Brian, could Lynn, I really feel for you and completely understand, and at least personally, I don't want to put anything in this report that would harm your company's reputation or make it seem like you haven't gone above and beyond in answering our questions. So are you okay? Would you be okay with the sentence as written, or does that still make you uncomfortable? And I'll say, if it does make you uncomfortable, I would move whatever, that we take it out. Because this is a letter to the select board. The select board knows what they did, and I don't think it's necessary if it's going to harm Lynn.
I don't see how it harms. It says the scope of the
Well,
work.
I asked Lynn's opinion, Paul.
It doesn't say it wasn't completed, or it wasn't done.
Paul, I understand, but I asked Lynn's.
Sure. Go ahead, Lynn.
It's a tough question to answer. It is a fact that I was hired by the town manager and the Board of Selectmen before the task force was formed. So maybe if you add in that the Board of Selectmen were involved with the selection, through an RFP process. So I think that that's sort of, again, kind of gets to the nuances that, there's information that was missing here.
Is this something that people can feel comfortable enough with? The LDS consulting group was hired by the select board through an RFP process, and its scope of work was established by the former town manager before the task force was formed.
I can live with that.
I'm seeing nods, but not necessarily nods from everybody.
That's fine. I'm fine.
But the scope was not just coming from the town manager. It was coming from the Board of Selectmen.
Okay.
They were the ones asking the questions. The town manager was simply a facilitator.
Right, maybe you say the LDS consulting group was hired through an RFP process, and its scope was developed by the select board and former town manager or something.
Since the town manager just does what the select board says, should we just say the scope of work was determined by the select board?
So that's what I had put. I put the LDS consulting group was hired by the select board through an RFP process, and its scope of work determined by the select board before the task force was formed.
Okay.
I'm good with that.
I hate to say this. This might be the best we're going to get to. Just to throw it out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's, it is a statement of facts, and I think it's,
All in favor?
Yeah, wait,
Aye.
let me.
Right.
Yeah, sorry. Pat, Paul, those were both yes. Stephanie,
Yep, I'm good with this.
Sumya, and Bill.
That's fine.
Okay. All right, I think we should, so all these motions, again, were anything in red here is put together by staff based upon your motions. We did not add any new motions. Maybe we combine one but this is all based upon yours. So I think the goal was to, I'm gonna read out this motion. Or actually, I should take it back. Someone should make this motion, and if it's going to be changed, I'm going to change the wording. But someone should start us off. And this was a qualifying question. The way that this is worded says the town should terminate negotiations with Civico and reissue the RFP. So this was based upon our last meeting, and the idea was that should we go completely all the way back to the RFQ and start completely over from scratch? And this is just a clarifying question from staff to who's ever going to make this motion. Or is it really just go back to those pre-qualified bidders, the 5 that went into the RFQ process? So, yep, someone's, Sumya, with your hand up.
Yeah, I was just reading this, and personally, I'm a little reluctant to terminate negotiations with Civico right now. I feel as a town, we have a lot of bargaining power with Civico. I'm also concerned about the reputation of our town to terminate negotiations as opposed to try to negotiate, and if things don't work out, do another RFP.
Yeah, so I think the way that this is going to go from here on out for today is that we're basically, we're going to vote. So the idea is that we can have discussion on each vote and we can vote. But if someone, we're really just trying to start this. We don't have a lot. There's about 10 motions here that we've gleaned from the group.
And like, these don't have to be the motions you vote on, right? Like, this is something that we put together based on what we've been hearing, the feedback received. If these are not the motions that you all want to make, then make new motions. Report, right? Yeah. But as Brian said, I don't think the whole point is that some of these motions are not going to get a consensus vote. So, we're going to list the folks who are in the yes column and list the folks who are in the no column and provide that information to the select board. And maybe it'd be helpful just to quickly just say, I spoke with Susan Verdicchio about just in terms of how this is going to be presented to the board on the 18th. So basically, I was just going to do 3 slides that is like a summary of this cover letter. So it's like who was on the task force when you met, what that rankings table showed, and then the list any motions and votes that you took. And then the intention was for each member of the task force to have probably 2 minutes, just timing wise, to present your own thoughts to the select board. So everybody will be able to, highlight their specific opinions and thoughts on things from your individual report. So again, I don't think, we're going to get consensus on all of these issues. And the motions are just examples that we put together based on the feedback and listening to you all. And obviously this is your report. So if you want to make different motions, that's obviously your decision to make at this point. Thanks.
Thanks. Paul, you had a question?
Yes, I believe this motion is in regards to my initial motion last week, correct?
Yes, I believe so.
So I think part of what I tried to do, and Brian and I tried to do when we put these together, is to break the motions out into individual pieces. So I think, Paul, maybe your motion had a couple different elements to it about reissuing RFP and price and parking maybe. And so instead of having that as one big motion, we've tried to break it out as individual pieces. So that, because some of those pieces you might get more consensus on than others, right? Some folks might say we don't want to reissue the RFP, but everybody might agree that parking needs to be reconsidered or something like that. So that's why I was trying to kind of break it out into smaller pieces.
But should we put this one last then? Because after listening to Mina, some of the things we're going to discuss, like putting revenue in there and maybe changing the weight on the parking, could automatically trigger a necessity for a new RFP, correct?
That's possible. This is all about, these motions are should, these are, should consider, that the town should consider, the select board should consider. So I see what you're saying, but I still think if we want to wait till the end, that's perfectly fine. We were just trying to follow the motions as they came in.
Yeah,
Which was that this was the motion on the table when we left, even though it might not make sense to put it first, there was a motion on the floor.
well, yeah, it was the first part of the motion that included, like Beth said, 2 or 3 other items, like putting revenue as a criteria, upping the value on parking, and also breaking the 99-year lease into 39, 30, and 30. So,
Well, would you be willing to amend that motion to try to negotiate with Civico? And if that doesn't work out, then do an RFP?
I don't think we can do that based on the legal view that we just were rendered. And like Mr. Cummings said before too, and I do a lot of negotiations in my business, I don't see any advantage we have negotiating with one person or one entity. I think we should open it up this way also, because I'm thinking of town meeting and the general public. At least they're going to feel like they got the best deal in a negotiation scenario. I don't see where we can get with just us and Civico. And plus, like I said, my main thing there is that we're going to discuss some things that, in my opinion, based on what I just learned, is going to trigger a new RFP anyways.
Pat, then Marty, and then Stephanie.
And Paul, this is your motion, I think. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know how strict we're going to be about messing with this. I do think the second point that Beth has added, I think this motion gets friendlier to the people that want to move this along, to add language that the town rebids the RFP and should go out to the current pre-qualified bidders. My understanding from talking to some people in town meeting, that if you use the pre-qualified list, you may even be able to have this back on by spring town meeting. So I would like to see this motion done now and get it over with. When waiting 2 minutes, it's just an opinion, Paul, whether it's legit or not, or whether they can do it. Selectmen can do whatever they want anyway. I like this motion as town should terminate negotiations with Civico, reissue the RFP to the current pre-qualified bidders. And that makes this thing go fast, and he puts it out to fair market. It creates transparency with everybody that it went back out, and we move on to the next one.
I would make that motion then to just.
So instead of just make the motion, I think.
You want me to dance, or you want me to say it?
Yeah, let's do it.
I make the motion to approve the town should terminate negotiations with Civico and reissue the RFP to the current pre-qualified bidders.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second, Bill. Discussion. Stephanie's discussion.
I have a comment and 1 or 2 questions. Comment being, my job is negotiating business deals also, and I would not I disagree that the only way to get a good deal is to kind of play the field and go back and forth. There's absolutely a point at which you invest a lot of time with a partner and you continue to try to make that work, and you would have a horrible reputation in business if you did not do that. My question, I wanted Marty's opinion, since she's worked as a developer in this field her whole career. I wanted her to weigh in on what the reputational hit could be, if there would be any, to the town reissuing an RFP here. And I also wanted someone to Pat said several members of town meeting thought it could still make Springtown meeting, but I don't, they're not the experts on that necessarily. So I'd like to actually know what the timing would be, the steps that need to happen in a new RFP, and truly what those times are.
Marty, why don't you go ahead first, and then we'll take it on over to legal for the timing of the RFP.
Yeah, I mean, so I have a couple of comments, and this will be a little disjointed because there's been a lot in the conversation here today. First of all, if a new RFP goes out, the same situation will apply where the town will only be able to negotiate with the selected developer. So if a new RFP goes out, the town will not be able to say, oh, I like number one and I like number two, so I'm going to go back and forth between them, because that's unfortunately, as I understand it, the way a multifaceted bid process like this works. It's unlike price, where you just have one factor and you pre-qualify and you negotiate price. So the town will be in the exact same situation of picking a new developer and then negotiating with that person to make the deal as good as they can. The question about reissuing the RFP, I think it's a question of how much the town wants to alter. If the select board just wants to go in and look at the rating criteria and re-rank the weighting criteria and not change the rest of the RFP, that could in theory be a quick process. I think it is very ambitious to think that that's actually going to happen. Get out on the street, get proposals, because you need to give developers, even if it's the same developers, you need to give them time to refresh their numbers, look at what the town said has changed. So you're going to have to give them, 60, 90 days maybe to really do it right. So I think the idea of going to Springtown meeting with a new RFP is really probably not realistic. I think the fact that the town had a referendum vote on this, and the fact that this has been so contentious, will in fact make developers think twice about how much money they want to invest in an RFP, because it does cost money to put together a response to these proposals, and it takes, paying your lawyers and architects who don't do that for free to help you put a proposal together. So I think people will certainly dig into what happened and ask questions about how serious the town is about doing this. And if the town goes out to rebid, they've got to have a really, really kind of crisp and, consensus about what they're looking for to get a good group of responses.
Thanks for that, Marty. Sumya, further on the motion.
Yeah, I just had a quick question for a follow-up question for Marty and maybe Mina. Is there any circumstance where the town can negotiate with more than one developer, or does the town just pick a developer and then they do the negotiation afterwards?
Maybe Mina would be the best to handle that.
I'm trying to think if I've seen an example of that, Soumya. So as I said before, 30B16, which is what this would move under, is very flexible. And I think the town may have explored the limits of its flexibility by sort of having a backup proposal. I can't recall that I've ever seen a sort of best and final offer process or two selected bidders, and you could structure it as multiple rounds of it. But really the public procurement process is intended to put everybody on even footing when they put in a proposal. And then once the proposals are opened, to have that selection among them. So Lynn and Marty, I'm not sure if you've seen anything like that. We certainly would want to confirm that there isn't a way, but I have never seen it, and I can't recall that anyone else in our office had either. So
the closest thing that I can think of is in an interview process, a town might take the group and narrow it down to 3, and then the interview process, the town might say, would you be willing to try to find 2 more parking spaces, right? Or would you be willing to think, so you could get some information in each individual interview, but that's kind of as much as I've seen in these kinds of proposals that are based on many factors, not just price.
Further on the motion in terms of questions.
Sorry, Brian, let me just add one small thing just on timing for that. To Marty's point, for the developer to do it right is one factor. There's also the side of it for the town to be able to present something that town meeting can sink its teeth into and understand well in advance takes some time. We were hampered a bit by waiting for the T's proposal last time. To the extent that there is a new RFP and a negotiation, it would also be more difficult, and just to be perfectly frank about this, to negotiate two LDAs, two different agreements, et cetera. So beyond the sort of interview, initial feeling out that Marty described, to go down a path with multiple entities is also difficult unless you're putting forward a sort of set agreement and there's only one very easy toggle being moved, price, for instance. But if you're looking at sort of having the developer provide the substance of what is going to happen, and you're trying to work that into a land development agreement and then a lease, that's hard to do with multiple parties.
I would echo that you're not going to get a lot of cooperation under that scenario either from the bidding parties. It's hard to explain how small a world it is, but everybody's worked for everybody, and affordable housing developers all support each other. And I think that you would have a hard time finding, the second or third or fourth bidder on this that would come back and would, kind of chop the legs out from under Civico, because they wouldn't want someone doing that to them in another municipality. Not sure how, what better way to explain it, but there is a lot of camaraderie. Everyone has, the same goal at the end of the day, which is affordable housing and successful projects.
Thanks for that. Further on this motion, otherwise I'm going to call a vote and we're going to keep moving down. So further questions for staff or anybody else related to this motion? Okay, I'm going to do a roll call vote here. The town should terminate negotiations with Civico and reissue the RFP to the current pre-qualified bidders. First by Paul, second by Bill. Sumya.
No.
Pat.
Yes.
Stephanie.
No.
Paul.
Yes.
Bill.
Yes.
Okay, so
Brian, will you record the
Yeah,
names in the columns there? Yeah.
yeah, I'm gonna try to do this quick.
So Brian, what you're typing, I
Yep.
didn't know, you wanted us to submit them, but in regards to the next one, which goes to price as a criteria, what I would have suggested if I sent you an email, sorry, it's clear that parking, affordability, and revenue or price are all kind of at the top. I would have proposed, and I don't know how we put it in a motion, but just I guess to start the discussion, that parking be rebid at we keep affordable housing at 4x, parking being rebid at a 5x, and revenue be billed at a 3x. So they're all kind of following our rankings in priority. I don't know if that's three motions or if that's going to confuse the heck out of everybody, but that seems pretty much where we came out. And parking, I think, was a 2x and really needs, it clearly is the number one point we've gone round and round on. So I can make those in motion if you want me to, or your second motion relates to revenue.
Yeah, I was just trying to see if there was potentially other motions that we could tie that to, but it looks like that would be a standalone motion of, or you could say the evaluation criteria should be as such. You can, in terms of, you guys can do any motions you want. These were just suggested motions. So just want to make that clear that you're not bound by any of this. This is just us trying to make sense of everyone's recommendations and putting them in a motion form.
All right, so I'll, in the interest of time and the interest of compromise, I'll make a motion that hopefully maybe everybody can be happy with. I would propose the RFP is reissued with new rankings, and the town should issue new rankings with parking, affordable housing, and revenue all as a 4x. So we put them all in the same bucket, and we don't nitpick over what wins. That makes Stephanie happy and the affordable people happy, and it keeps all of those as a top priority in the process. And
when you mean pricing, do you mean revenue?
Revenue, yeah. I think it's called revenue in your bucket, right?
Revenue, affordable housing, and parking.
All as a 4x.
Or do you want to say all as
Equal.
instead of ranked equally or something?
Yeah.
Well, I'm just looking at, I mean, I think what Paul was trying to say in his, which I liked, was to keep the RFP and not really throw the RFP out the window, because there's a lot of work in it. There is stuff in there about, green type of things and sustainability. There's a lot of good stuff in the RFP that's further down. And rather than force them to reinvent the RFP, Paul initially was going to the point, let's just keep the RFP and change some of these core rankings. So I'm trying to make less work and keep this thing moving so that, maybe it's not spring. I don't, but I'm just hearing stuff on the street. So the staff knows better than me. Based on where the rankings are at, if you made them all a 4X and maintain the rest of the RFP to some extent, it just makes it faster and easier.
So is your motion on the floor right now, Pat, is that if the RFP is reissued, the town should make the new priorities revenue, affordable housing, and parking all ranked equally in the valuation criteria? Is that?
Well, I would rather say it as a 4X rather than equal evaluation criteria, as each at a 4X, and then it fits into the RFP better. What I don't like about equal evaluation is they could rank something above it. All of a sudden, maybe design is above it or whatever. I mean, 4X is clearly the number one thing. I mean, it drops quickly to 3 and there's not many 3s, and then it gets into 2. So, and I'm just one guy, but I'm just trying to move it along. And so I'm kind of negotiating with myself to help get us to a decision.
So Pat, I think I have your motion here. Sorry, there's not too many screens. There's a lot of hands up I see. So Lynn, Paul, Stephanie.
I'm sorry. I mean, the reality is that the RFP that was chosen had the most amount of parking in it. So I'm just unclear. I know what your goal is, but I'm just not sure that this is going to get you, where you need to go. The developer that was chosen had a combination of all of these different things: high affordability, purchase price, and parking. So I'm just throwing that out there, just kind of an outsider looking in.
Yeah.
Sorry, Stephanie, then, or Paul, and then Stephanie, I think it was.
Yeah, the original, I would second this motion for the reasons already stated. And the parking, the last RFP was only given a light weight. So this brings it up to snuff where I think we need to be. And like we said, those are the 3 major topics: the affordable housing, the revenue, and the parking. So I think weighing them all the same at the top of the wait list is important, and keeping all the criteria that was in the original one at their present values would make this move quickly and efficiently. So I second that motion.
Brian, can I just recommend an amendment where it says in the last part but keep all criteria the same? I think we should say as the previous, keep all other criteria the same as in the previous RFP. Or criteria ranking or something like that.
Yeah, so it'd be keep all other previous criteria the same, or all other.
So I would reference the previous RFP.
Sure.
Say like criteria weights or ranking or something.
Okay.
Is that agreeable to?
I think that's what everyone was trying to say. Yeah. Yeah. So Stephanie and then Bill.
Appreciate the attempt at a compromise here, Pat, but I do just want to clarify that the affordable housing people, myself, giving equal weight to PARs as housing for people is not going to feel satisfactory. And so that this is an affordable housing development primarily, and not making that an above and beyond importance is going to be a hard thing to get past a lot of us, myself included. So if you want, I'm as written, I'm going to say no to this. I don't know if you want to make changes based on that, since your goal was to get something we can all agree on.
We're first going to go to Bill and then we'll go back to Paul.
I was okay with it before, but I think that adding in the fact that all other criteria weights would be the same would throw out the possibility of eliminating the retail, which I think is a terrible component. It would throw out I suspect it would jettison the idea of making the building a little taller to get a little more space in it and anything else, but that's a pretty encompassing phrase to add to that. But having it without that last phrase in there, I see the reason to put it in, but there's quite a few unintended consequences, precluding other changes, isn't there?
Were those items ranked, Brian? Were the building height and the retail component, was that part of the evaluation?
It was in terms of advantageous or highly advantageous.
But height wasn't.
Height
was not.
The objectives of the site were to have an affordable mixed use site. So that was an objective of the project.
I would, if I can just jump in since it's my motion, I would take a friendly amendment from Bill that just says, you can keep your wording just the way it is. Wait, same as the previous RFP, subject to the task force other recommendations. And that way, whether it's a design criteria or not, but I mean, we want height to be looked at. We want the chamber building. I mean, at least I do personally. So I would, if Paul's okay seconding it, just add subject to other recommendations of the task force, and those could be anything. Bill, you okay with that?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
All right. Further. I'm just looking at the time here. Further on this motion, in terms of any further clarification needed, I see Bill and Sumya and Paul. Bill, why don't you go ahead, then Sumya.
Hand is down.
Sorry, Sumya?
I agreed with Patrick's suggestion.
/ Bill's suggestion. Works out. Sumya.
So since this lot is primarily affordable housing, would you be willing to amend it so affordable housing is weighed higher?
So you can put an amendment on the floor if you'd like to make a motion to amend this motion. Yep. So there's a motion on the floor to amend this to what? So if these are all 4, what would affordable housing be? More than 4x or some specific number?
I would make it 5x. And then
the others 4x?
Yeah.
So there's an amendment, there's a motion to amend this motion to change the affordable housing component to 5x with revenue 4x and parking 4x. Is there a second to this motion?
Yeah, I second that.
Second, Stephanie, discussion? Paul, you have your hand up for discussion?
Yes, yep. In reference to a comment Stephanie made earlier about cars versus people, I think it's people of all types are inclusive of this. The parking, the way I see it, is supporting the livelihoods of the people that are downtown with businesses, residents from town and from out of town that come and solicit these stores and frequent these stores. So I'm not looking for extra parking spaces. I'm looking to support the current residents and the businesses downtown, which a lot are struggling. I would, in reference to comment on someone's recommendation, I think we ranked them. We all ranked them, and I don't see how we can put parking below affordable housing when it had 25 points. And so I would recommend we just keep it as is.
Further discussion? I see Pat and Sumi have your hand up. Is this related to this motion, the amended motion?
Yeah, I just had a comment, Paul. So I agree with you. I definitely think the downtown businesses need to be supported, but not everyone drives. I ride my bike downtown. I walk downtown, and studies have shown that towns that have more foot traffic have more commerce. So we need to look at it not just as parking, but as transportation, because a lot of people don't just drive downtown. They might be walking and cycling downtown.
I appreciate that. For young people like yourself that live within decent distance of town, that's great. But my mother's 87. She lives up by Vincento, and I don't see her riding a bike down Johnson Road or walking downtown either. And I think there's a lot of people like that, outside a mile of downtown that will appreciate the ability to drive down, park, go get their hair done, go shopping. But I do appreciate your fact, and it's nice that you're able to do that.
Pat, and then I think we're gonna vote on the amended motion.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't make this motion with the intention of dissing affordable housing. I think these are all very different, revenue, parking, affordable, very different components of a development and evaluated. It doesn't mean they're all in completely different areas, and there's multiple other motions we have that go to addressing parking and revenue, including Bill's retail ideas, the Chamber of Commerce building. So I don't think this takes away from affordable housing. The lot's zoned affordable, and there's already criteria in here on what the percentages are and everything. So you're not going to lose any of that. And I think we all supported the criteria that were there. And it's even one of the motions just to make those criteria potentially a little stronger from the revenue. But I'd vote against the amendment, and just because I don't think this is really trying to say that.
All right, I think I'm going to call for a vote on the amended motion. So the amended motion on the floor right now is to rank affordable housing as 5x and revenue and parking as 4x, and keep all the other criteria weights the same as the previous RFP. We're going to do a roll call vote. Stephanie?
Yes.
Bill?
I don't see 5X referenced in the top.
Sorry, I did not write that. This is the amended motion.
But should we vote on this one first, Brian? Because this
we have to vote. No, we cannot do that. We have to vote. We have to vote on the amended motion first, and then if that whatever happens, then we go back to the main motion. So right now, the amended motion is that affordable housing would be 5x, and revenue and parking would be 4x. Bill, do you have a vote?
I would vote in favor of it if the affordable was ranked 4x along with the other prime aspects, but to put it here and cause that much extra attention to it, I don't favor that.
Okay, that's a no. Sumya?
Yes. Reluctantly a no.
Fair enough. Sumya is a yes. Pat?
A no.
Paul?
No.
Motion fails. Motion fails. Back to the original motion, which is the motion that you see in front of you. So if the RFP is issued, it would be equally ranked as 4x for all evaluation criteria and keep the other weights the same as the previous RFP. This is the main motion. Again, we're going a roll call vote. Pat?
Yes.
Sumya?
No.
Paul?
Yes.
Bill?
Yes.
Stephanie?
No.
Motion carries. We're going to keep moving here. So we kind of lumped all these other motions into kind of a similar bucket of under this is saying, regardless of whether the select board elects to reissue the RFP or renegotiate with Civico, the board should evaluate these scenarios. So we're just going to go through here. If there are questions, we can open up to discussion. The town should encourage a developer to consider increasing the building height, specifically to allow for additional units, whether it's affordable or market. So this is, again, we broke up these motions. This is a very targeted motion. Are you willing to make the building higher by 1 floor in order, or I shouldn't say 1 floor, higher, in order to allow for additional affordable and market rate units? Marty has her hand up, and then Stephanie.
I would just say that this one in some ways only applies to Civico, because when the RFP went out before, the building heights were all over the place. Some people proposed higher buildings, some people proposed different buildings. So this, in some ways, this particular one, in my view, would only apply to negotiating with Civico.
But if they did issue the RFP, they could include specific requirements about building height. Like there could be an evaluation criteria.
Well, then that's a whole different discussion to get agreement in the town about what the height's going to be, because there was a lot of discussion about the planning board about what heights they liked and what heights they didn't like. And so if the town is going to specify a height, A developer really needs to know that. Otherwise, you're just asking the developer to read the zoning code, talk to people around town, evaluate the site, and put in your best proposal for what you think you'll be able to sell to the town when you get your zoning done. So it would be very different if the town says, we want an exact this big building, because then you're taking a lot of the developer's job away from them. And I'm not sure the town wants to go down a path of trying to design a building and then say to people, build on this thing.
Right. No, I guess I was just, there's ways you could, if they did it reissue the RFP, there are ways to craft the criteria around options for building height.
I think that's hard, because this was really about revenue. The conversation that this task force had was more about revenue. And it just said, explore other things to increase revenue. So I don't, maybe you can, I'm just not seeing how.
Sumya and then Stephanie.
Yeah, I was just wondering if in that motion we could take into account the planning board's height limit, so none of the so it doesn't exceed the proposed height by the planning board.
So just a point of clarification there. So there is a by right height of 40 feet. There is a special permit height of 48. And this is in a plan unit development, which has no height limit.
And also, if the developer decides to go the 40 feet route, the town's zoning would not apply.
So the point is, or sorry, the question from Sumya was, well, can we put at least a recommended height or some type of a height there? And this site was pegged somewhere in the under 60-foot mark, but that's not like a vote, and the zoning doesn't require that or anything like that. But that's based upon a lot of research of people trying to develop around the town, and being near the common. The idea of going over 60 feet was problematic for a lot of people. Stephanie and then Pat.
My question was the by right height, which you just said was 40 feet. How does that, does anyone off the top of their head remind me what the Civico building height was? Was it at 40 feet?
It was 48, which was the special, which was the special permit height. So it was between 40 and 48 feet, with the highest being 48.
So put another way, the current Civico proposal is already nearing or at what the town has kind of said we ideally like in the central business district. Fair?
Yes. Yes. That it's in this, it's within the zoning limits of the special permit heights. It's not outside of the special permit height, which others were. Pat, you're muted.
Sorry, kids. This was Bill's motion, so I don't want to, Bill, you probably could speak to it. I see this as just sort of a general theme that flows through a couple of these motions of, we all want more affordable housing and we're trying to drive more revenue. So just giving developers flexibility and saying to them that the task force thinks this is worth looking at. I'm all for it, and at least getting developers to think, should I add another floor? Because even if you had Civico and they added another floor, by Bill's math, you're adding 8 units, which turns into revenue, whether it's for us or for them, and turns into parking or something else. So Brian, I don't know if you need someone to make the motion and second it. I mean, I'll make it to get it on the table if you need to be formal about it.
I definitely need people to make motions.
So I'll make this motion as it's typed.
Okay, the town should encourage the developer to consider increasing over Civico's building height to allow for additional affordable and market rate units. First by Pat, is there a second? Bill, second has a Bill. Discussion. Bill, you have your hand up. Now's a good time.
Yes, I'm happy with that motion. I'd also be happy with something that even specified of a height up to 60 feet. So it's just to give it some authenticity when they started to use it. I think the whole thing that we talked in the very first session was that there may be a need to give the negotiating committee something to work with. Again, if you are able to get more units in here, or we do without this, or we do without something else, we can make it a better building overall and give them the tools. So as Pat read it just now, as you wrote it down, would be perfectly okay as well, or with a 60-foot limitation in there, either one.
Thanks for that. Mina, you have your hand up?
Brian, I want to ask you actually a question briefly, just to make sure everybody's on the same page. Because if I understood you correctly and my memory of the zoning is correct, the only way under current zoning to go above 48 feet would be to do a planned development proposal, or is that not true?
That's true. A PUD. It would be planned unit development, which is it's a different type of special permit, but still would be allowed.
And can you? I mean, it might just be helpful to, in like a sentence or two, if you can. What other requirements would there be for a planned unit development? Because I think that's just something to keep in mind, that developers would have to meet other obligations to get a PUD. They wouldn't.
Sure. Yeah. And that's really easy. It's basically providing a mix of different types of affordable units.
Okay.
So it's essentially, we'll give you the height if you give us different types of affordable or different types of units. So.
Okay. That was the understanding I had too. I just want to make sure we're not, going without that understanding.
Sure. Stephanie, further on this motion?
I am not comfortable with the 60 feet. Let's just do this really quickly. I move to amend this motion to say that the town should consult with planning, zoning, and others applicable to determine changing the height, or some better wording than that. My reason is we didn't say anything about design. Like on this committee, we did no research. We heard a very brief presentation, and I don't feel comfortable giving this degree of a firm statement, though I do think height could be evaluated. There's too much of an implication on the neighbors there for me to say up to 60 feet without having heard from like anyone on planning, for example.
Is this something like this, that they consult with the planning board and or other experts to determine an appropriate height for the site? Is that what you're?
To determine the degree to which height could be changed to allow for additional units. So say yeah.
Okay. I wouldn't say that that's related to this motion. I think it's a different motion.
Happy to just vote on this one, and
yeah,
just to the extent we're trying to get consensus here.
Sure. So as of right now, there's a first and a second on the town should encourage a developer to consider increasing over Civico's proposed building height up to 60 feet to allow for additional affordable and market rate units. There's a first and a second. We've had discussion. Roll call vote. Sumya.
I had a question. So these are two separate motions now?
Right now, yeah. Right now, we're just doing this first motion, and then Stephanie really had it. It was related, but it really couldn't be part of an amended motion of this first one. I don't think. I think it's a different motion. So we are voting currently on this top motion here.
Just because so can I vote it like on this with consultation of the planning board, or is it just a yes or no right now?
Right now, this is just a yes or no, or you could, just like any other amend it, you could try to amend the motion as well. But there is already another motion that's kind of in the works here. So.
Okay, so I'll vote yes, but it's contingent on the second motion. If that makes sense.
I don't think it's a yes or no.
Okay, then yes.
Bill.
Yes.
Pat.
Yes.
Paul.
Yes.
Stephanie.
No.
Motion carries. So we have a motion on the floor, but sorry, Mina, you have your hand up? Or no, Mina? No? Okay.
Brian, I'll rescind.
You'll rescind. Okay.
Yeah, I'll put it in my report.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, looks like 6 or 7. It's unclear timing if that's possible, but let's try to keep moving. The town should encourage a developer to evaluate options for the removal of the Chamber of Commerce building, specifically to allow for creation of additional housing units and or parking. So again, this is not saying that this is going to happen. It's simply to evaluate the options. So if anyone wanted to make this motion, and we can open up discussion or go from there.
I'll make the motion to approve this.
I'll second.
All right. Any discussion? Actually, I think this was one of the few I thought was going to be a 5-0 in my opinion anyway. But the town should encourage developer to evaluate options for removal of the chamber building, the creation of additional housing. Lynn, you have a procedural question or?
I do actually have a comment on this. I think that asking the developer to spend the time and money to get to the bottom of whether or not the easement is going to be an impediment, or whether or not there is an engineering report, structural, or is there asbestos in the building? Is there lead paint? All of those factors are a huge burden to put on the developer. I think when I had brought this up last week, my thought was that if the town wants to take a time out and actually do the evaluation themselves, that if it is a go, meaning the Chamber of Commerce can come down, then there is actually an opportunity for revenue to the town. But I just don't see a developer that is going to be able to get quick answers during an RFP process to say, yeah, I mean, they could say, listen, if we can develop the Chamber of Commerce, we could get this and we could pay that. But that doesn't really get the town, I think, where it wants to go on this, which is, can it really